Welcome to New Neighbors and Friends, a timely forum discussing issues and possible solutions affecting education, appearing regularly here on community television. My name is Charles Neighbors. I'm the host. Talking about schools and learning, I'm reminded of the warning that careful teachers write on their blackboards or their whiteboards: save, do not erase. I hope you'll feel the same about our program. Today, our guest is Vincent D'Onofrio, a dramatist and an adjunct professor at New Jersey City University. Welcome.
Thank you, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here.
Vincent was born and raised in the Bronx, and after graduating from Bronx Community College, and then from the City College and the City University of New York, he later attended and was graduated from Suffolk University in Boston. He's taught for 35 years at the middle school level in Washington Heights in New York City and in Staten Island. Today he teaches history at New Jersey City University. From the labor side of teaching, he was a union rep for the United Federation of Teachers for almost 10 years. After retiring from teaching on the secondary level, Vincent began writing plays and short stories. His most recent play, Defense of Doubt, A Tale of Mother Teresa, was performed recently in Manhattan, New York's St. Francis Church. His next play, Seeing is Not Believing, will be performed on the New Jersey City University stage this fall. Again, Vincent, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for inviting me.
As a teacher and a writer, have you identified any gaps in basic skills amongst your new or incoming students or high school graduates? Be as specific as you can.
Well, I think I would open the discussion by saying the following. I think the biggest gap I observe is that many of the students do not feel writing is a key a subject, because they are deceived by the ease with which you can write on a computer and the ease which errors are corrected. Grammar appears to be very easily corrected, even though, of course, we know a computer can do many things except think. So that is the first observation I would make. I would further make that many students don't come prepared with the basic literary styles.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, the two formats, actually there are three now, kind of variations, where the citation, where you cite the work, many students feel it's not important to cite, or they're confused over whether citation is...
And they've never heard of stealing.
Not that I have heard of.
Or plagiarism, I think, as it's known in the trade.
You know, that's an interesting point. I think part of that is not their fault. I think with the dispersion of information, the readiness of information from the cell phone, the laptop, to the basic computer, I think many students feel, well, it's there, I can download it, why isn't it mine? And I think that's a big problem.
Well, that brings us to the point of what influences on student activities in classroom and otherwise, both good and bad, do their smartphones, their personal computers, and other electronics gadgets have on them?
Well, firstly, I think smartphones and the little electronic gadgets, the smaller size computers, a double-edged sword. Firstly, it makes obtaining information quite easy. The ability to download, even to read materials right there in the class is a blessing. You know, you have at your fingertips background, you have at your fingertips important information and even images. But if I may, Charles, the danger there is the internet is a minefield. Mm-hmm. One of the most important lessons I present to students with is the legitimacy of the information. There are many sources online that are, firstly, incorrect, written by incompetent people, unresearched, undocumented material, and frankly, some of it is criminal, as we know. Areas, I am not a fan of Wikipedia. I know it's very easy to get a hold of, but I was somewhat disappointed with that site when just one day I happened to scroll through on the Peloponnesian Wars, which of course took place in Greece, and it was giving a little background history of Greece, and they didn't mention Alexander the Great, which I thought was kind of interesting. So they lost my vote on that one.
Or a Pyrrhic victory.
Yes.
It's interesting. I've been a substitute teacher in high schools for the last 4 years, and when I see kids using their mini iPods and iPads to put down the lesson that's going to be there for homework the following day, and by the way, checking to see whether the assignment was accurate or not. We know that there is, amongst the computer fans, the acronym GIGO, which stands for garbage in, garbage out. And that might explain the shortcomings of Wikipedia, where there really is no final screen for the information that goes on, except the reaction of the people who can correct it. And if they don't, then erroneous information simply stays there. How do you think you can cure your students of this information addiction that they seem to have? They can't let their little phones and iPads and iPods out of their hands for more than 2 seconds without looking at their lap. And I know it's not to see if their clothes are organized properly.
Well, Charles, first of all, the readiness of information on these internet-driven devices is a two-edged sword. First of all, it puts a lot of information, as I said before, in the hands of students, but they must learn the legitimacy of the sites. I cannot emphasize that enough. They must also know that those sites, I'll write your term paper.com, those are the sites to avoid. And how I handle that, at least in one way, is to help students take pride in what they do. Use these vast resources. Yes, there's an information glut out there, but learn how to cut through, what shall we say, the grizzle, and get to the real source of the information. Information addiction, there's no way to cure it. We're all hooked on it, and it's going to continue.
One of the methods that I've used occasionally in history classes is to remind the students that what they're writing is conditioned to some extent anyway by their own interpretation of what they perceive of as the facts. Nobody's going to judge them wrong if their judgment is erroneous, as long as the facts are correct. Too easily and too often, they take as written in stone something that they've seen on a computer or on television. Not so often from an encyclopedia, which they haven't cracked since they were in 3rd grade. Before I laugh myself silly, how much have current student language been affected by text speak? That is, acronyms that they always use in their emails and so on.
I love that topic because I take a little bit different slant. I see it really, there are two sides of the same coin. Firstly, it's extremely dangerous. Students will incorporate not only the acronyms, but the style of writing.
Yeah.
Okay? Rather, we can flip that same coin, and on the other side, we can see when you are writing a text message, and I text all day myself, I must confess, you have to build your meaning into as few words as succinctly as possible. So this forces me to think of words that will cover much ground. So in that way, I actually think, if tied in properly to the English curricula, I actually think it could help the students to get right to the point. My rule when students have to return a paper, whether it's in the history or the English classes, is to get right to the point. Don't fill me in with those, it's, and that's.
Right.
Just get to the point. And I think texting helps that because you are forced, once again, to say what it is you have to say in as few words as possible.
In the days before instant speak, there was a term called cableese, which referred to the fact that it cost a lot of money to send a cable across the Atlantic Ocean. You were charged by the word, and it was not a small charge. So one day, Cary Grant, the actor, got a cable from London, from the BBC, which said to him, "How old Cary Grant?" And he wrote back, Old Cary Grant, just fine.
They got their point across.
Do you think that incoming college students are adequately prepared for the writing loads they're going to encounter in college today?
No, I don't. I don't think they have all the requisite skills. I also think they're not prepared for the challenges of these assignments. Firstly, at the secondary level, truly from K through 12, the curriculum of the schools today is being so crammed with preparation for tests and non-instructional purposes that the teachers simply don't have the time to give that kind of instruction, that kind of personal instruction. There used to be study halls. There used to be one-on-ones where students can take their papers to their teacher and have some personal time. The school program does not have that time anymore. And so the payback of that era, which I believe it's a very serious era, is in that students are going to college with less preparation than they should.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school several centuries ago that we had term papers to write that were 20 or 30 pages long with annotations and sources and footnotes. The longest paper I've seen in high school recently was maybe 6 pages, and once a term rather than 2 or 3 times a term. How would you recommend improving these abilities at the secondary level?
Firstly, it's a very large question, and it cannot be answered simply. First of all, the entire the culture of education needs a relook. We need to spend less time and emphasis on preparing students for standardized and tests that measure whatever it purports to measure. But if you're measuring what students have learned, why do you have to prepare them at least 2 to 6 periods a week? That is stealing from art, from science, which produces the kind of originality and thought that students need to express. That's number one. That's not in the students' control. There has to be stronger hookup with the parents. The parents have to enforce the rule that their children need the time to complete their assignments. And I think it's very important that once again we emphasize to the students themselves, this is serious stuff.
Good. Thank you, Vinny. Now we're going to break.
Warning, ruthless invaders are among us, and the future of fishing depends on stopping them dead. Only you can prevent invasive species from spreading before it's too late. Inspect, clean, and drain your boat, motor, and live wells, and properly dispose of invasive species on land, not back in the water. Stop these evil menaces from taking over and threatening our precious outdoor heritage. Inspect, clean, and drain. Do your part to halt the silent invasion.
You mentioned earlier when we met, Vinny, that you've been reading Diane Ravitch. There's been a succession of sweeping fixes to amend or radically change America's public schools. What do you think of the results so far?
Disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. America is way down in math, in science, in graduation rates. First of all, Diane Ravitch I'm quite enamored with her. She has studied the educational process. She is a defender of teachers, and I'm not going to, get on the bandwagon saying, the teachers do not need improvement. Teachers do need improvement. But today's American culture approach to education is we have to blame someone. We can't blame the politicians because they're the geniuses. We can't blame the treasurers of the tax department because they're spending all the money. So it's got to be someone. Okay, let's blame the teachers.
Well, I remember...
If I may, Charles, may I just tell you this little anecdote? I once confronted Al Shanker, who was the late and great leader of the UFT and later the AFT, and I says, Al, Why is it that whatever happens in education, everything that goes right is caused by politicians and people outside the school system, and whenever anything goes wrong, it's the fault of the teachers? So he looked at me and says, Vinny, let me tell you something. He says, that's based on everyone has had a bad teacher in their life. And whenever you ask someone for blame in education, they think of that teacher they didn't like, and that's why teachers get hit. But the most important approach is that we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to educate our kids? Or do we want them just to be achievers on tests? Do we want to make sure a student has achieved X level on a reading test, but then never reads a book the rest of his life? Okay. Do we allow, we in short have to get politics out of education, because that's what's driving this reform.
Exactly.
Cut wherever you can, reduce services wherever you can. If we do not educate this generation of youngsters, America has a very limited future.
One of the things that Diane Ravitch, who is now a professor of education history at New York University, has gotten from people who are positive about No Child Left Behind and other quick fix programs to improve schooling, is that she was one of the architects of No Child Left Behind. And it took her 7 or 8 years to discover its flaws. And now she's speaking out about the flaws. So they are accusing her of flip-flopping, and what she's done is to learn more and express herself better. There is no such thing as static in education. Robert Hutchins, the famous educator, president in his 20s of University of Chicago, once said famously, "Every school should be burned to the ground every 25 years and started over." Well, we seem to be in that process right now, and it's not working very well. How does the system that's going on now, which is a very fluid one, compare with previous education standards? And was the previous system broken or merely out of step with today's management consultants?
I think that's the problem, management consultants. Let me state, first of all, education and educating children, students, is wasteful, okay? Kids waste paper, they break pencils, they break chairs, they wear things out, they consume paint, crayons, textbooks wear out, on and on. They even lose the basketball, on and on. So when you bring in a so-called captain of industry, such as you're seeing in a very underhanded way in some of your charter schools, which are nothing more than franchise operations, okay? They want to streamline, that's fine. I'm for streamlined schools. They want to cut and be more efficient. I'm for cutting and efficiency. But not to the point that impacts the ability to deliver education to a youngster. Let me give you an example. One of the charter schools I was reading in a Ravitch article was being ballyhooed as making enormous strides and really using money in the most efficient way. When she investigated a little further, she found out the principal of that school had dismissed about 3/4 of like the 2nd and 3rd grades. So when they gave the test in the 4th, it was a fresh class. They were getting $35,000 additional monies from private foundations. So yes, you need management consultants. You need to fix your system. But you need people who are familiar with education. The recent debacle that Mayor Bloomberg of the city of New York committed, or caused, I should say, by hiring Mrs. Black as head of a chancellor.
That was a disaster.
It was more than a disaster. It showed you the arrogance of politicians, and I'm not picking on Mayor Bloomberg. He's my boss. I got to be careful. I am not criticizing the politics of it. That's his business. But to appoint a woman who had 0 experience in education and had to get a waiver, okay? What message are you sending? That's the problem. Get the politics out of education. How do you change the system? My quick Vincent offer you a recommendation. One, you have to nationalize the curriculum. You have to have a standardized curriculum across the United States of America. Two, you have to have panels of educators, people like Diane Ravitch and many, many others, who are able to stand up to the Bill Gates of the world and can say money is not the solution. Organization and education policy is.
And so is motivation.
And motivation.
You and I, and anybody who ever had a good teacher, never forgets that teacher. You don't forget the people who show you another way to look at something, or another way to think about something, or another way to believe something that you thought was absolutely right and turns out to be a little bit not so. Do you think it helps or harms students who seem to be, to use the current buzzword, challenged? What about those who simply have trouble learning for whatever reason?
Firstly, the key ingredient in the soup of education is the teacher. And I can tell you, I know many teachers. This young crop of young people coming out of the education courses and programs in the colleges is probably the most enthusiastic group of young people I have ever seen. And do you know what's the saddest statistic? Is that almost 50% of those young people will leave education within 5 years. In the city of New York, its entire teaching staff is changed, rotated every 7 years. Why? Conditions, salary, and the harangue of the politicians that never ends, filmmakers that are destroying the morale, that which is the fabric, the inner fabric. For a teacher, and I hope the public understands this, for a teacher to get up in the morning and go out to their classroom, enters the room, closes the door, there are 30 eager little faces in front of them, many of them perhaps challenged, educationally challenged, many of them perhaps non-English, some fearful, some victims of crime, etc.
And some hungry and
some
enough
hungry.
sleep.
And the teacher has to somehow take that matrix and make it work and deliver a sense of optimism, skills to that matrix of students. And I defy anyone to show me a job that is more complex and demanding than that.
You might as well add frustrating to that as well, because the teachers that I have enormous respect for are those who have first period classes in any school system at any level, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school, or even college. You have a first period class, and you're going to get people who haven't waked up yet, who didn't have any breakfast, so they can't think too well. The last place they really want to be is sitting in that chair being told what to do by someone who already knows. How do teachers or parents motivate students who are C and D students to study harder and to complete their homework assignments on time?
One word: reinforcement.
Right.
Or encouragement. Unfortunately,
Could I add involvement to that?
Involvement, you certainly can. Unfortunately, the letter C has a very bad reputation. Unfortunately, people see C as, oh, well, it's almost a D and a couple of steps from an F. But you know, I've had students for whom a C was a mega journey. For a youngster who's struggling to put together the language, the math, the demands of his or her own life, and to achieve a C and really be trying and working at is an accomplishment. See, that's the other miracle aspect of a teacher.
We have a system in our schools here in New Jersey called leveling, which separates students ostensibly by their ability. That's a system that didn't exist when you and I were going to school, at least not in that term. I suppose there was some organization which said that kids who are going to college are going to be taking certain courses, and kids who are going to get high school diplomas are going to take some on, and kids who are going to go into business, something else, kids who are going to do vocational studies, something else. We don't do that anymore. because we feel that everybody has to go to college. We're going to be wrapping up here in a little while, Vinny, but if you could rewrite the high school preparatory curriculum, what would you recommend? Feel free to cross-pollinate and focus on interdisciplinary studies and their positives or negatives. Where do you start?
Firstly, I would start at the top. The entire organization of the school has to be reorganized. Firstly, I would say we should make available international travel and exchange students for all high schools. We should de-emphasize the testing aspect. Add art, music, and all the so-called minor subjects, which are not minor, and throw that into the mix, and perhaps lengthen the school day, perhaps create dormitory high schools where youngsters can go away from their community into other areas to attend high school. And I believe if you put even a few of those into practice, the result would be magnificent.
One last quick note. Describe for the audience what efforts you make to help your students prepare for the rest of their lives beyond college. Is it vocation, vocation, vocation?
I tell them, here's the good news, here's the bad news. You live in an era when the entire world is open to you. You live in an era when you can find just about any profession you seek, but please be ready. You're probably going to change that career several times in your life.
Thank you, Professor Vincent D'Onofrio.
You're welcome,
I enjoyed
sir.
talking with you, and I think the audience will enjoy the show as well.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We'll see you again.
Yes.
That's it. That's our show. And thanks to Professor Vincent D'Onofrio. Come back and visit us again the next time Neighbors and Friends comes your way.